let's finally add some sound effects to our animation. So just as a reminder, this is the completed code here. And what we're going to have is when we start our animation by clicking space, we're going to have an idle engine animation like so. And then as we start to accelerate, this idle engine sound is going to fade out and the moving engine sound is going to come in. And this moving engine sound is going to change in pitch as we accelerate. So let's take a look. So it's not just a constant sound, however, the pitch of the engine is going to change. Of course, mimicking an actual engine where you increase the RPM. And finally, we're also going to add a braking sound when we brake. It's going to sound like so. And that should be it. Let's get started. I'm going to go back to my unfinished one here, and in my code, in my assets, I have a bunch of sounds. So in here we have this engine sound, and this is a loop. And this is the only engine sound that we are going to have. We're not going to have an idle engine sound or an engine sound with a higher RPM or anything like that. We're going to use this exact same one, and we are going to change the pitch so that it will sound as if it's an idle engine or an engine moving with a higher RPM and so on. And then we also have this braking sound effect that we are going to use for braking as well. So how can we change the pitch of our audio? We are going to use this library, tone.js. Using this library, we are going to be able to change the pitch of our audio, and you can install it using npm. I'm just going to include the script like so. And just put it in my index.html before our index.js file. And now we can use this library. I am going to, let's close these files. I'm going to create a new file in our scripts folder. I'm going to call it audio.js or mjs. And in here, I'm going to define a new constant. I'm going to call it idle engine player. And this is going to be the audio that you're going to play when the engine is idle. So I'm going to define a new tone player like so. And in here, we can pass a couple of things, the URL of our audio, which is included in our assets folder. And I'm going to copy its name, this one, like so. And we need to loop this, so I'm going to pass loop, set it to true. And then we need to call the method called toDestination here. And now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to export a couple of functions from this audio file. I'm going to call this one play all audio. And in this function, I'm going to play the idle engine audio by calling idle engine player.start. And another one, pause all audio. And here I'm going to call .stop. And by having these functions, we're going to be able to play any audio that we're going to define here and also stop any audio. And what we need to do is in our index.js file, when we play and pause our animation, we need to call these functions. So in here, after playing or pausing our animations, let's call here pause all audio. And in here, let's call play all audio. So now when we play our animation, this function should be called, and we should call idle engine player.start, and we should hear our audio. So let's give it a try. And as you can see, when we start or stop, we hear our audio that we have here. However, as we agreed, to make this sound as an idle engine, we are going to need to change the pitch using this tone library. So how this is done is by defining something here, or defining a constant, and then I'm going to call it maybe idle engine pitch. shift, and we need to define a new tone dot pitch shift, and in here we need to pass the pitch that we need to set our audio to, pitch, and I'm going to set it to maybe -20. And then instead of calling to destination here, now we need to remove it from here and call it here instead, and then call idle engine player dot connect, and then connect this pitch shift to our idle engine player, like so. By having that, if we now try and play, as you can see, the pitch of our audio is now -20 and it sounds like an idle engine. So I'm going to use this one when the engine is idle, but then I need to define another one for when the engine is not idle. So we're going to do something very similar. So I'm going to copy these and just change the name, maybe call it engine player now instead of idle engine player. And nothing else should be changed here, and then here let's call it idle engine pitch shift. And for our when our engine for when our scooter is moving, let's make the pitch shift -5 instead, and then we're going to increase it as we are accelerating. However, let's make this our starting point, and then let's connect our engine player pitch shift to our engine player, like so. And let's also play this audio when we call play all audio. So engine player dot start, and also engine player dot stop. And now if we try, they both should be playing on top of each other, right? However, while we are stationary, we don't need the engine sound to be appearing, right? So we can set its audio, its volume to a very low volume so that we can only hear the idle sound initially. So we can do that using engine player dot volume dot value, and then let's set it to something low. So 0 is the full audio. If we do higher than that, it's going to be higher than the normal. If we do negative value, it's going to be lower than normal. So let's make it maybe -20, and we shouldn't be able to hear it initially, right? And of course, as we accelerate, we are going to increase this volume. So now that we have that, let's use this in our speed.mjs file, speed, in order to manipulate our audios while we are accelerating or decelerating. So we are going to need to export some stuff from here. Let's actually export everything, our audio players and also our pitch shifts. So we're going to need these in our speed.mjs file. Now in here, in our handle speed function, let's use this function to, in addition to updating the text in our speedometer, let's also use it to manipulate our audio. So in here, we're going to need to know if we are accelerating or decelerating. So I'm going to pass an argument here called accelerating. And now when we call handle speed, let's also pass accelerating here and pass it in this update playback rate function. And then when we call update playback rate, if we are accelerating, let's pass true here. So now in this function, we're going to know if we are accelerating or decelerating. First of all, we need to do something when we start accelerating. So let's say when our playback rate is between 0 and 2, we need to fade out the idle engine sound and then fade in the engine sound. So let's add a condition here. If our playback rate, so if street animation the playback rate is greater than or equals 0, and also it is less than let's say 2, which means we are either starting accelerating or we are ending our deceleration. So street animation playback rate is less than 2. Let's do something here. So what do we need to do is we need to either, if you are accelerating, of course we need to fade out the idle engine player and increase the volume of the engine player. So let's get our engine player from audio.mjs and let's set the volume value to something that is going to be based on the playback rate. So if the playback rate is 0, it means we need our engine volume to be -20. We don't need to hear it if the playback rate is 0, right? However, if the playback rate is 2, let's say we need the volume of the engine player to be full, which means that we need to set it to 0. So to do that, we can get the playback rate, multiply it times 10, and then subtract 20. This means if the playback rate is 0, then this is going to be -20. If the playback rate is 2, this is going to be 2 times 10, 20, minus 20, 0. And we can do something similar for the idle engine player. For the idle engine player, we need the volume, volume.value. We need the volume to be 0 if the playback rate is 0, and to be -20. We don't need to hear it if the playback rate is 2 or larger. So we can do that by multiplying street animation playback rate times -10. Let's also add an else here. So if our playback rate is larger than 2, then let's make sure that the engine volume is 0, which means we need to hear it, and the idle engine is -20, which means we don't need to hear it. Of course, if the playback rate is larger than 2, which means we are moving. Now let's give this a try. So as you can see, when we started accelerating, the idle engine sound faded out and the other one faded in, and when we decelerated, the opposite happened. However, what we need to do now is, as we are accelerating, we need to increase the pitch of the engine sound. So as you can see, it is very constant if we accelerate like so. We need at this point to start increasing the pitch of our engine sound, right? So in this function, we know now if we are accelerating or not. So we can do a check here. If accelerating, let's do something else. Let's do something else. And what we need to do is, if we are accelerating, is we need to change the pitch of our engine player. And we can do that using this engine pitch shift object that we exported here. This one. Using this object, we can change the pitch that we defined here. And we need to change it. We need to increment it slightly as we are accelerating. However, we also need to have a maximum. We don't need to just keep increasing the pitch, right? So let's say our maximum is going to be 15. So we're going to increase our pitch from -5 to 15. So let's in here check if our engine player pitch shift .pitch is larger than or equal to 15. We're just going to fix it at 15. Otherwise, we are going to increment it slightly by maybe 0.03. This is also just by trial. So engine pitch shift .pitch and increment this by 0.03. And sorry, here here I should set engine pitch shift .pitch. And if we are decelerating, let's do the opposite. I'm going to copy this and let's do the opposite. Let's set our pitch. Let's decrement our pitch by -3. So let's subtract here. However, we don't need to go below -5. So let's check if our pitch is less than or equals -5, let's fix it at -5. Now let's give this a try. So it seems to be working fine. However, why don't we try to mimic gear shifting, where we are going to have multiple gears and our RPM, our pitch, is going to drop every time we change the gear. So this is similar to what we've done here in this final example. Alright, let's do that as well here to sound more realistic. So let's say, of course, if you are accelerating, we're going to change the gear at certain speeds. So let's add a condition here, and let's have an array, and let's say our speeds are going to be maybe 15, 35, 65, and then maybe 95. So let's say if we reach 15, we're going to change from 1 to 2, from gear 1 to gear 2, gear 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5. This is just an assumption, of course. So if our speed is one of these speeds, so let's use includes here and check if this array includes our speed, our current speed. Let's drop the engine pitch shift back to -5 so that we can mimic the sound of an engine when shifting gears. So if you give that a try now. This is looking great. We just need to add our braking sound and we should be done with our sound effects. So let's go to our audio.mjs file and let's create a new player for our braking sound. So I'm going to export a new constant. Let's call it break player. And let's define a new tone player. And let's give it a URL, and this lives in our assets folder, and it is called, let's copy the name, this one. And we don't need to loop this one, however, so I'm going to pass loop false. And then remember, we need to call to destination here. And by exporting this, we are going to be able to import it in our speed file and play it. So let's go here, and when we break, which is here, we can play our sound as we decelerate. However, let's do some checks first. First of all, let's only play this sound, of course, if our animation is not paused. And also, let's say the braking sound is only going to play if we are moving at a high speed, so we can do that check as well. And also, let's only play that sound if we pressed the back arrow or the left arrow for a certain amount of time. So we did not just press the button, however, we press and hold the button for a while. So how can we know that? As we know now, when we hold a button down, this event listener is going to keep running. So it is going to keep running until we release the button. So if we define maybe a variable here, let's call it break counter, and let's set it to 0 initially. And as we are clicking or holding this arrow left button, let's increment this break counter. However, when we release it, we need to set it back to 0. Now what we are going to have, let's try to console log this break counter. What we're going to have is, if we click and hold this button, this number is going to keep incrementing, and if we release it, it's going to reset back to 0. So if we click again, Oh, looks like we have a mistake here. Oh, sorry, let's reset it outside of this condition. So if we click and hold, increment, if we release, it's going to go back to 0 again, click again, start from 0 and increment again, and so on. So using this number, we can be able to identify if we have been clicking and holding the button for a while. So now in here, when we decelerate, let's do our checks. Let's check if our street animation .play state is not paused, so it is running. And let's also make sure that we are moving higher than a certain speed. So let's check the playback rate. Let's maybe make sure it is larger than 5. And maybe let's let's make sure the break counter is larger than maybe 5. And at this point, we are going to decide to play our breaking sound. So we can import it and then call .start here. And by doing so, let's give it a try. Nothing happened when I braked at a low speed. Let's try at a high speed. And as you can see, our audio is playing. Let's maybe remove this console log that we have here. And I think that should be it for our sound effects. One thing that we haven't done is in this completed example, remember when we are stationary, we can rev our engine. Like so. However, I'm going to leave this one to you, maybe as an exercise, and I'm going to leave you the code for it in the description as well, if you'd like to check it out. But that's it for this series of videos. Thanks for watching. Make sure to check my course on modern web animations. You can check it out using the link in the description. We discuss CSS animations and transitions, the web animations API, scroll-driven animations, and the view transitions API as well. So thanks for watching and see you in the next video.